one of the biggest critics of Bitcoin mining of late, which has been Greenpeace USA. And I want to clarify Greenpeace USA, not Greenpeace overall. It is the USA division that took $5 million in lobbying money from Ripple executive chairman Chris Larsen and used it to create the Clean Up Bitcoin hashtag Change the Code campaign. And you have been a harsh critic of them, again, Greenpeace USA, and because you are a self-proclaimed environmentalist. I think perhaps I don't know if you did some work with Greenpeace in the past, but
I actually did.
I'd love your perspective on that. I read your excellent rebuttal to Greenpeace's, I think it was July 2023. You did a great rebuttal, like point by point, of this report they issued. I read that on the show because I just thought, well, people should hear this.
You did a fantastic job, but look, it's hard, and people like Troy Cross or Margot Paez or myself, we don't enjoy doing this. It's like, oh, really, again? But it's necessary. It's proof of work, and you get so many things coming, and it's the same old stuff. It's not even particularly intellectually stimulating. At least if they were good, I often say Bitcoin deserves better critics, because the arguments they're not intelligible arguments. They are so anchored in bad data, old data, basic misapprehensions or misunderstandings. What you find out when you go down this Bitcoin mining rabbit hole, I'll back up. When you go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you realize one thing very fast, and that is the population at large is financially illiterate. And I don't mean financial literacy in terms of Robert Kiyosaki understanding where to put passive income. I mean basic, what is money? And then you go down the Bitcoin mining rabbit hole and you realize that not only is the population financially illiterate, they're also energy illiterate. And so you're dealing with these two forms of illiteracy. And then you're arguing, it's like arguing, I mean, this will sound very insulting and patronizing, but it's the best analogy that I can think of. It's like arguing with 5-year-olds, because you don't have that base level of literacy in terms of how energy works, that you can actually have an intelligible debate. So it's exhausting, it's tiring, and it's necessary. So yes, Greenpeace USA took it upon themselves to launch this campaign to try to tidy up Bitcoin. Their hearts are in the right place. I'll give them that. They really sincerely believe that they're doing something great for the world. Unfortunately, it's anchored in ignorance. It's been fueled by, as we know, central bank FUD and altcoin FUD in concert. And so the irony is you now have this, Greenpeace used to be where Bitcoin is today. They were the challengers. They were the mavericks. They were the rule breakers. You think back to the 1980s, and I'm old enough to remember them. You think of these intrepid activists on these tiny little boats stopping whaling from occurring in the South Pacific, or trying to stop the French from doing nuclear testing in the South Pacific. Now, I'm not talking about using nuclear energy. I don't have a problem with that. But I did have a big problem with the French choosing to test atomic bombs in atolls in New Zealand's backyard in the 1980s. And a lot of Kiwis said, well, if it's that safe, why don't you do it in Paris then? And so Greenpeace was really leading the charge in stopping a lot of these activities and did some fantastic work over a long period of time. What's happened more recently with particularly Greenpeace USA, which is really unfortunate, is it's been captured by a need to bring in more financing, and has chosen to do that not through grassroots activism, but through basically corporate sponsorship, which it says when you become a member of Greenpeace USA, it says we will not, it's funded by people like you. It's funded by grassroots. We don't take on corporate sponsorship. So there's an integrity gap there. And then in terms of the source material for this campaign, if you dig into it, I did a post a little while ago that talked about derivatives. And one of the problems in the global financial crisis is you had all these derivatives which were linked to these toxic assets, mortgage-based backed securities. And then you get derivatives of these securities and derivatives of the derivatives. And in information exchange, the same thing happens, where you look at the sources, and it looks like you got maybe 15 sources saying Bitcoin's bad for the environment, but you look at the original source, the original piece of knowledge, it comes back to the same place. Mora et al. Or Alex de Vries, every time. Every time. So you think you have 15 independent sources of information. Actually, you have one source of misinformation. And the incredible thing is that the central bankers, in their belief in their own almighty power, have not even bothered to cover their tracks. I mean, they haven't even bothered to make it opaque that Alex de Vries is an employee of a central bank. I mean, if that isn't arrogance, I don't know what is. Honestly, if I was a central banker, I would have at least tried to make that a little bit more opaque.
Right, add a couple layers of abstraction or
exactly,
something.
Exactly, about where the funding source is coming from. So that is the origin. So it's funded by the Ripple executive chair, and that's where the economic fuel comes from, and the information fuel comes from central banks. And so you have this, again, what started off as a grassroots organization who now has been completely captured by large vested financial interests, launching a campaign against Bitcoin. Get out of here. So I smelled a rat pretty early, and as someone who likes to geek out on maths, I was affronted by the appalling quality of just numeracy. You can add mathematical literacy to that as well. Andrew Bailey points out, when he looked at the Mora et al. Study, that they, on one of the axes, they'd accidentally put gigawatts rather than megawatts, or terawatts rather than gigawatts. So it was like a 1,000 level mistake. So that's what we're up against. We're not up against good, robust science. We're up against stuff that has been widely debunked, that is infantile, or so steeped in vested interest, it's just not even funny. Using metrics that have been designed on purpose to try and make something look bad. One of the things that gets me the most, and this is one that Greenpeace USA have recycled constantly, but not only them, but all the mainstream news media, is this idea. You mentioned swimming pools. Every time you mine a Bitcoin, you've drained 15 swimming pools, or whatever your latest number is. Okay, this is the way it works. This is the way, if you're wanting to create misinformation, then this is how you do it. First of all, you look to see whether there's some genuine, legitimate cause for saying it's bad for the environment. When you find out that's no longer the case, then you've got to invent metrics. And so what you do in this case is you say, okay, well, how many transactions is Bitcoin processing? Okay, and what's its energy? Okay, so if we divide the amount of energy by the number of transactions, we've come up with a metric, which is the energy use per transaction. Okay, and now let's do the same thing for water and do the same thing. Now you ignore, of course, the layer 2 network completely, which can process billions of transactions, because that would fly in the face of being able to say nasty things against Bitcoin. So you ignore that. You let people believe that the only way to do a transaction is on the blockchain itself. And you also lead people to believe that the energy consumption comes from the transactions, which of course it does not. It comes from mining. And then you can create all these sorts of funny metrics. It's a little bit like, say I wanted to further the argument that New Zealand should have more sheep to grow its economy. Then what I'd do is I'd find out, okay, how many sheep does New Zealand have? Okay, it's 30 million sheep, or it's 50 million sheep. Great. What's its GDP? Well, it's $100 billion. Okay, whatever it is. Okay, so let's divide the GDP of the country by the number of sheep and come up with the GDP per sheep. It's a few $1,000s. And then I say, great, so now that we've worked out how much GDP it has per sheep, then if we double the amount of sheep, we'll double the size of the economy. Well, no, you won't, because these two variables are in no way connected. And it's the same way with energy usage and transactions. You've just divided one number by another. They are in no way connected whatsoever, to try and make out the appearance that what? That as Bitcoin processes more transactions, the amount of energy will exponentially grow. That is the fear that it's designed to create, and it's all anchored on basic mathematical FUD. So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, I was just going to say the other piece to that is that it completely ignores the amount of value transferred. Of course, you're breaking it down just on this per transaction metric, failing to mention that, of course, block space is scarce also, so you can't model that out into the future as if transactions will continue to grow exponentially. It's just flawed on so many levels, but it ultimately comes down to just emotional propaganda, right? It's giving just enough little tidbits of numeric data to be able to say, to give the semblance of legitimacy. And then the rest of it is just emotional propaganda. And the comparisons too, well, it's using more than an entire country. That can't be right. And it's like, well, okay, if you want to play that game, let's look at Christmas lights, let's look at video games, let's look at the entire massive porn industry. We can look at anything you want. You want to really play? Let's look at the military-industrial complex. Let's look at how much we pump into that. But of course, that's not the game they're trying to play. It's as you said, they want to just mislead, to steer the conversation the direction they want. They're not concerned with facts, and I think that's been the most frustrating thing, I'm sure, for you as somebody who is actually an environmentalist who has worked with Greenpeace in the past. But for all Bitcoiners who see these campaigns come out and say, well, come on, we're doing this again. I thought we were past this. I thought we were over this. It's not even new FUD. It's just old recycled FUD.
Same old FUD. It's zombie FUD. It's like the transactions per metric has come up as a zombie form. It used to be energy per transaction. That didn't work out so well. It got debunked, and now it's water use per transaction, which is flawed for exactly the same reason. But it gets headlines. It got into about 10 different mainstream news articles at the end of last year. Well done, Alex DeVries. And one thing they've done very well, credit where credit's due, is got a fantastic publicity machine behind. So every time that one of these, they're not even peer-reviewed scientific publications, they're commentaries. But every time there's a whole PR machine, because the headlines are so great, right? I mean, which headline is going to sell better? Bitcoin is cleaning up landfills, or Bitcoin uses a swimming pool of water every time you process a transaction? It's the one that creates a greater moral outrage that'll fit the business model of the clickbait-based mainstream news media. So they love this stuff.